The moment I walked into that lawyer's office in downtown Chicago, the air changed. I'm talking about a room full of strangers in expensive suits. A woman with perfect highlights and a Chanel bag. Two men who looked like they'd never worked a single day in their lives. And a teenage girl clutching her phone who looked up at me like she'd seen a ghost. They froze. Every single one of them. Just stopped. And I remember thinking, why are these people looking at me like I just walked out of a grave? I was wearing a simple black dress. My hair was still a little messy from crying the night before. My eyes were red. I had lost my husband just 11 days earlier. I was grieving. I was exhausted. I was barely holding it together. But the second I stepped through that door, the woman in the Chanel bag dropped her coffee cup. Literally dropped it. Hot coffee spilled all over the floor, and she didn't even flinch. She just stared at me, her mouth slightly open. Her face going from perfectly composed to absolutely shattered in about 3 seconds flat. And then I heard her whisper, and I will never forget these words for as long as I live. She said, "That's her." I had no idea who these people were. I had no idea what was about to happen. And I had absolutely no idea that within the next 60 minutes, my entire life was going to be rewritten. Stay with me. Because this story, it doesn't end where you think it does. Hey, real quick. If you're already feeling the curiosity, if something in your gut is telling you this story is gonna be something different, hit that subscribe button right now. I don't post clickbait. I post real. And before we go any further, drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Seriously, I want to know. Are you in New York? Texas? California? Somewhere overseas? Drop your location down below. It genuinely means everything to me. Now, let's get into it. My name is Maya. Maya Ellison. Well, Maya Ellison Carter now. Or I guess Maya Ellison Carter, widow, as of 11 days before that meeting. And I need to start this story the right way. Because if I don't give you the foundation, the ending won't hit you the way it hit me. I met Daniel Carter on a Tuesday. Not a Friday night at some rooftop bar in River North. Not through Hinge or Bumble or whatever app people were using that year. I met him on a Tuesday afternoon at a laundromat in Wicker Park, one of those old ones with the flickering lights and the machine in the corner that always eats your quarters. I was 26, fresh out of a really rough breakup, working as a freelance graphic designer, barely making rent on my one-bedroom apartment, eating a lot of ramen, telling myself it was a phase. Daniel walked in carrying a garbage bag full of laundry, like he had absolutely no idea what he was doing. And I mean that literally. He stood in front of the machines for a solid 4 minutes, just reading the instructions on the side like it was written in a foreign language. I laughed. I couldn't help it. He looked up. And he smiled the smile that I still see sometimes when I close my eyes. Kind of crooked. Kind of embarrassed. But completely genuine. Like he wasn't trying to be charming, he just was. "I've never actually done laundry before," he said. Just admitted it. No shame. No pretense. Now listen. In Chicago, a guy in his early 30s who has never done laundry before, that could mean a lot of things. That could mean he's been living with his mama. That could mean he's the kind of guy who drops everything off at a service and lets other people handle it. That could mean a dozen red flags I should have clocked immediately. But Daniel didn't come across as entitled. He came across as genuinely, almost adorably clueless. Like someone who had been living in a bubble and was just now peeking out at the real world and finding it fascinating. I helped him. I showed him which detergent to use, how to separate the colors, why you don't put a wool sweater in the dryer unless you want a doll-sized version of it back. He laughed at everything I said. Not in a fake, trying to impress way. In a real way. Like my jokes were actually landing. We talked for 2 hours while our laundry went through the cycles. He told me he worked in finance. Vague. Just finance. I didn't push. I told him I was a designer. He got genuinely interested, asked about my work, asked about my process, asked what I was working on. He actually wanted to know. By the time the dryers were done, he had my number. He texted me before I even got home. I think I mixed up our socks by mistake. I'll need to return them, preferably over dinner. I smiled so hard my face hurt. We dated for almost a year before he proposed. And let me paint you a picture of what that year looked like, because I want you to understand the kind of man I believed Daniel to be. He lived in a modest apartment in Lincoln Square. Nothing flashy. 2 bedrooms, older building, slightly squeaky floors. He drove a used Honda Accord that had a crack in the dashboard. He wore the same North Face jacket for 3 winters in a row. He shopped at Trader Joe's and Aldi. He knew the prices of things. He didn't throw money around. I remember once, early in our relationship, we were at a Target, and he spent like 10 minutes comparing the price per ounce of 2 different kinds of dish soap. 10 minutes. I teased him about it. He just shrugged and said, $1 saved is $1 you don't have to earn twice. I thought he was just frugal, practical, responsible. All the things you want in a long-term partner, right? He never talked about family. I knew his parents had passed away. That's what he told me. I knew he had some extended relatives he wasn't close to. I knew he'd grown up in the Midwest somewhere, moved around a lot. He kept those answers short and changed the subject smoothly. I noticed, but I didn't push, because I figured everybody has things they're still processing. Lord knows I had my own stuff. What I did know about Daniel was everything you actually need to know about a person. I knew he remembered every small thing I ever mentioned in passing. He remembered that my late grandmother's favorite flower was a yellow tulip, and he would show up sometimes with a single yellow tulip from the farmer's market, just because. I knew that when I got sick, really sick, a bad flu the winter after we met, he drove 45 minutes through a snowstorm to bring me soup and Gatorade and stayed on my couch all night even though I told him he didn't have to. I knew that he volunteered at a food pantry in Pilsen on the 2nd Saturday of every month, consistently, without making a big deal about it. Didn't post it. Didn't announce it. Just did it. I knew that he cried watching the movie Up. Full-on cried. And didn't apologize for it. I knew that when I told him about my dad's battle with cancer, which I hadn't told anyone outside my immediate family at that point, he held my hand for so long and so steadily that by the end of the conversation I genuinely felt less alone in the world. Like the weight had been redistributed somehow. That was Daniel. So when he got down on one knee at Millennium Park on a cold October evening with a simple, beautiful solitaire ring and a voice that was shaking slightly, I said yes before he even finished the question. We got married 6 months later. Small ceremony. City Hall, actually, followed by dinner at a restaurant in Andersonville with our closest friends and family, maybe 30 people total. He didn't want anything big. I didn't either. It felt right. It felt like us. I was 28. He was 34. And I was the happiest I had ever been. We were married for 5 years and 3 months. Our life was not glamorous. I want to be clear about that. We were comfortable, not struggling, but not rolling in it either. We bought a house together in Oak Park. 3 bedrooms. A yard with a patio we kept saying we'd redo, but never got around to it. We had 2 cats, Biscuit and Marmalade. Don't judge me, I named them during a baking phase. We cooked together on Sundays. We argued about whose turn it was to clean the bathroom and whether the thermostat should be at 68 or 72. We watched too much TV. We took one big vacation a year, usually somewhere domestic, Nashville, New Orleans, Denver, the Oregon coast. Daniel continued to work in finance. I didn't ask a ton of questions. He worked a lot. He traveled sometimes for work. He was always home when he said he'd be home. His phone was face up on the table. He didn't hide things, or so I thought. There were quirks, though. Things I noticed, but filed away without really examining. Like the fact that he never wanted me to meet his work colleagues. When I'd ask about a work event or a dinner, he'd always say it was boring, it wasn't worth me sitting through. He'd be back by 10. I assumed he was protecting my time. Now I wonder. Like the fact that once or twice a year, he'd get a phone call and step outside for it. Not often. Maybe 3 times in 5 years. But I noticed. Each time he came back inside, he'd look slightly off for a few hours, quieter, more distant, and then whatever it was would pass, and he'd be back to himself. Like the fact that he had a separate email account. I knew it existed because I once saw it open on his laptop, not anything incriminating, just a different account than the one I knew. When I asked, casually, he said it was an old account he still used for some professional stuff. I accepted that. I had no reason not to. Like the fact that every year around Thanksgiving, instead of going with me to my family's place in Milwaukee, he would spend 2 days doing something he described only as taking care of some obligations. He was always back by Saturday. He always brought me back pecan pie from somewhere. I didn't interrogate it. Looking back now, those moments feel different. But in real time? In real life? They were nothing. Barely blips. Because Daniel was present in every way that mattered. He showed up for me consistently. He loved me visibly and openly. He was my best friend. And then, about 6 months before he died, something shifted. It started with a diagnosis. Daniel had been having headaches. Bad ones. The kind that make you have to lie down in a dark room. He'd been having them for a while, but kept brushing them off, the way men do. I'm fine. It's just stress. I'll take some Advil. I made him go to the doctor in April. And then another doctor. And then a specialist at Northwestern Memorial. Glioblastoma. Stage 4. If you don't know what that is, it's a type of brain tumor. And it is one of the most aggressive, devastating diagnoses a person can receive. The 5-year survival rate is approximately 5%. The median survival from diagnosis is 12 to 15 months with treatment. Daniel was 40 years old. I remember the day we got the confirmed diagnosis like it's happening right now. We sat in the parking garage of the hospital for 45 minutes and didn't say anything. Just sat there. Daniel's hand was on the gear shift. I was watching a pigeon walk across the concrete. And then he said, very quietly, I have some things I need to take care of. I thought he meant a will. A power of attorney. Medical directives. All the practical, heartbreaking logistics of getting your affairs in order. And yes, all of that was part of it. But that was not all of it. Over the next few weeks, Daniel was different in ways that were subtle but real. He spent a lot of time on his phone, that separate email account I later figured out. He had several long phone calls that he took in the backyard or in his car. He started meeting with a lawyer, a man named Howard Greenwald, whose office was in the Loop, once every couple of weeks. I asked about the lawyer meetings. He said he was getting his ducks in a row. Estate planning. He was taking care of me, he said. Making sure I'd be okay. And then one evening in early June, he sat me down at the kitchen table. Biscuit was in his lap. Marmalade was on top of the refrigerator doing her weird surveillance thing. The dinner dishes were still in the drying rack. He looked at me for a long time without speaking. And then he said, Maya, there are things about my life that I never told you. Not because I wanted to deceive you, but because I was trying to protect you. And I was afraid. And I was a coward in some ways. And I need you to know that I am so sorry. I felt the floor tilt slightly. What are you talking about? I asked. He took a breath. My family, my biological family, they're not dead, he said. I told you they were. They're not. They're alive. And they are not good people, Maya. They are the kind of people that when I got the chance to leave, I left and I never looked back. But leaving was complicated. Because they have money. And I have been tied to that money whether I wanted to be or not. I sat very still. How much money? I said. He paused. My grandfather built one of the largest private real estate holding companies in the Midwest, he said. My father expanded it. The family net worth it's considerable. It's over $100 million. I don't remember exactly how my face arranged itself in that moment. I know my mouth was open. Daniel, I said. What? And that's when he told me everything. Daniel Carter, the Daniel I knew, had been born Daniel James Hargrove. The Hargroves were old money. Not flashy new money, old money. The quiet, invisible kind of old money that buys entire city blocks and doesn't put their name on anything and moves through the world like water, shaping everything, leaving no fingerprints. His grandfather, William Hargrove, had started with commercial real estate in Chicago in the 1960s. By the time Daniel was born, the family portfolio included properties in Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, and Michigan. Office buildings, retail strips, industrial warehouses, residential developments. It was a machine and it generated money constantly. His father, Robert Hargrove, was a hard man. Controlling, demanding. The kind of patriarch who treated his family like employees and his employees like furniture. Daniel had one sibling, an older brother named Philip, and a mother named Gloria who had, by Daniel's description, been systematically broken down over the course of her marriage until there was almost nothing left of who she used to be. Daniel grew up in a Lake Forest mansion. He went to private school. He was driven to lacrosse practice by a housekeeper. He ate dinner at a formal table where his father held court and nobody was allowed to speak unless spoken to. He was miserable. I had everything that people think they want, he told me that night at the kitchen table. And I felt trapped every single day. Like I was living in a gilded cage and the door was locked from the outside. When he was 22 and finished with college, the University of Chicago, where his father had donated a building, Daniel made a decision. He was going to disappear. Not literally, but as close as he could manage. He quietly moved money he'd been given as gifts and allowances over the years into a separate account. He changed his name legally. Carter had been his maternal grandmother's maiden name. He moved to a different neighborhood, got a modest apartment, got a regular job at a mid-sized financial services firm where nobody knew his background. He cut contact with his family. He did not respond to calls, letters, or emails for 2 full years. And then the calls stopped. Almost. Because here's the thing about old money families. They don't just let you go. Especially when there's an inheritance at stake. Especially when the family is the kind of family that views a person as an asset. Daniel's father had reached out 3 times in 7 years. Each time, he offered Daniel money, his rightful share, in exchange for coming back into the fold. Attending certain events. Being present in certain photographs. Giving the appearance of a united family. Daniel refused every time. But after his father's death, which happened 4 years before I met Daniel, the dynamic shifted. Because when Robert Hargrove died, the estate was divided. And Daniel's share, the share that had been sitting in trust, was $18.4 million. His brother Philip, who had stayed, who had played the game, who had been his father's loyal lieutenant and the visible face of the Hargrove family business. Philip received the bulk of the operating business, the properties, the ongoing income. But Daniel received his trust. His grandfather had set it up that way, apparently a specific bequest that Robert could not fully control. And the trust had grown. $18.4 million. And Daniel had never touched it. I didn't want it, he told me. I know how that sounds. But I didn't want anything from them. Taking the money felt like being their son again. And I had spent 15 years being free of that. But you kept the trust active, I said. Yes, he said. Because Howard, my lawyer, he told me that closing it out, refusing it formally, would require direct engagement with the estate and with Philip. And I wasn't ready to do that. I thought I'd figure it out eventually. And then, I didn't figure it out. And then I got sick. He looked at me. His eyes were so tired. And now I've figured it out, he said. And I'm leaving all of it to you. I'm not going to sugarcoat the weeks after that conversation. I was devastated. And I was angry. Not because of the money. I want to be really clear about that. The money was almost an afterthought in those early days. I was angry because the man I had married had been carrying a secret identity for our entire relationship. Because there were pieces of himself he had locked away and never showed me. Because I had shared everything, every fear, every dream, every embarrassing story about my childhood, every anxiety about my career, and he had kept this enormous part of his history in a box. I told him that. I didn't yell. I just told him calmly, through tears, sitting at that same kitchen table, that I felt deceived. That I felt like I hadn't fully known him. That it hurt. And he listened. And he didn't defend himself. He just said, "You're right. You deserved more than I gave you. And I'm sorry. I was afraid if you knew where I came from, you'd see me differently. I wanted to be just Daniel to you. Just a regular guy from the laundromat. I needed that to be real." It was real, I said. I know, he said. But I should have trusted you with the rest. We talked for a long time that night. And then for many nights after that. Because Daniel didn't have a lot of nights left. Glioblastoma moves fast. Even with treatment, radiation, chemotherapy, the whole brutal protocol, he declined steadily. By September, he was having trouble with words sometimes. By November, he was using a walker. By December, his good days were outnumbered by hard ones. But in between all of that, in the pockets of clarity and energy and presence, he told me everything. He told me about growing up Hargrove. About the dinners where his father would humiliate him in front of guests for getting a B+ instead of an A. About the Christmas when he was 11 where his mother had a bruise on her arm that nobody was allowed to mention. About the way Philip had internalized everything their father modeled and become, in Daniel's words, a smaller, meaner version of the same machine. He told me about the woman his family had expected him to marry. A woman named Constance Whitfield. Old family. Compatible portfolio. The kind of match that gets made over golf and charity dinners, not in laundromats. Daniel had dated her briefly years before we met, not because he wanted to but because it was expected. It had ended badly. Constance had taken it personally. And he told me about Philip's family. His brother had a wife, a woman named Diana, the one with the Chanel bag, though I didn't know that yet. And 2 sons who worked in the family business. And a network of lawyers and financial advisors whose entire purpose was to protect and grow the Hargrove legacy. They don't know about you, Daniel told me. Not really. They know I got married. I don't know how they found out, probably through some private investigator Philip hired at some point. But they don't know who you are. They don't know where we live. And they don't know what's in my will. And what's in your will? I asked, though I already knew. Everything, he said. You get everything, Maya. The trust, whatever's in our accounts, the house, everything. You are my wife. You are the only family I actually chose. And you are the person I want to take care of. I held his hand. I don't care about the money, I told him. I know, he said. That's why I'm giving it to you. He died on a Wednesday morning in February. At home, in our bed, with biscuit curled behind his knees and marmalade sitting on the windowsill, watching the snow fall over Oak Park. I was holding his hand. He was 41 years old. And 11 days later, I walked into that lawyer's office in downtown Chicago. Howard Greenwald's office was on the 32nd floor of a building on South Wacker Drive. The kind of office where the lobby has marble floors and security badges, and the elevators move in absolute silence. I had been there once before, a couple months earlier, when Daniel was still well enough to walk in on his own. Howard had gone over the will with us together. He had explained the process. He had been professional, precise, and quietly kind in the way that good estate attorneys sometimes are when they work with terminally ill clients. When I arrived that morning, 11 days after Daniel's death, Howard's assistant met me in the lobby and walked me up personally. I remember noticing she was being unusually careful with me, like I was made of something fragile. Which, to be fair, I kind of was. She opened the conference room door. And that's the moment I described at the beginning of this story. The room went still. There was Philip Hargrove, Daniel's older brother. The resemblance was there, same jaw, same height, but everything soft in Daniel had been made hard in Philip. He was wearing a dark suit that cost more than my monthly mortgage. His hair was silver at the temples and perfectly maintained. His expression, when I walked in, shifted through about 4 different emotions in about 2 seconds: surprise, recognition, calculation, and then a settled, polished neutrality that felt like a mask clicking into place. Beside him was Diana, his wife. Blonde, immaculate, the Chanel bag on the chair beside her. She was the one who dropped the coffee. She was the one who said, "That's her." And even after she collected herself, which took her a moment, she looked at me with an expression I can only describe as assessment. She was cataloging me, deciding what I was. There were 2 men I didn't recognize, both of them in suits, both of them clearly lawyers, both of them with that particular kind of expensive watch energy that says we bill by the 6-minute increment. And there was the teenage girl in the corner, maybe 16 or 17. Dark hair pulled back. Expensive sneakers. Looking at her phone, then at me, then back at her phone. She looked uncomfortable being there. Like she'd been dragged to something she wanted no part of. Howard stood when I came in. He shook my hand, guided me to the seat at the far end of the table, across from Philip. "Mrs. Carter," Howard said. "I'm glad you're here. We were just getting settled." "Who are these people?" I asked, because nobody had told me there would be other people here. Howard glanced briefly at Philip. "These are representatives of the Hargrove family. They expressed a request to be present for the reading of Daniel's will. As the surviving spouse, you have every right to request they leave. However, I'll hear what they have to say," I said. I don't know exactly why I said that. Maybe because Daniel had prepared me in some ways. Maybe because something in the way those 2 lawyers were arranged, like they were already positioned for something, told me it was better to know what I was dealing with. Philip leaned forward slightly. "Maya," he said, using my name like he knew me, like he'd always known me. "I think we should talk before Howard proceeds. There are some complexities that we'd like to address." "Complexities," I repeated. "Yes." He smiled. It was a smooth smile. Practiced. The kind of smile that lives entirely on the surface of a face and does not reach anywhere deeper. "We have reason to believe that your marriage to my brother was not legally sound." The room was very quiet. "Excuse me," I said. One of the suited lawyers slid a document across the table toward me. "We have obtained information," the lawyer said, in the flat tone of someone who has delivered bad news for money his entire career. indicating that at the time of your marriage to Daniel Hargrove, also known as Daniel Carter, he was already party to a prior marriage that was never formally dissolved. A marriage that would have rendered your ceremony legally void under the laws of the state of Illinois. I looked at the document. I looked at Philip. I looked at Diana, whose expression had become something almost triumphant. And I thought about everything Daniel had told me. I thought about the envelope he had pressed into my hands 3 weeks before he died. He had said, "Keep this safe. Don't open it until Howard tells you to. You'll know when." I reached into my bag. Let me back up. Because before I get to what was in that envelope, I need to tell you what exactly the Hargroves were claiming. After the meeting, after everything, I did my research. I talked to Howard. I put together the full picture. This is what Philip and his team had constructed. Years before Daniel met me, during that brief period when Daniel was still entangled with his family, before he cut off contact, before he disappeared into regular life, he had been pressured to sign certain documents. His father had been attempting to arrange a formal family trust restructuring that required all family members to sign various agreements. Among those documents, buried in the legal language the way landmines are buried in tall grass, was something that had been characterized to Daniel at the time as a legacy commitment agreement, but was actually, according to Philip's lawyers, a form of betrothal contract with Constance Whitfield. Constance Whitfield. The woman Daniel had briefly dated. The expected match. The document, and I am not making this up, I'm still almost unable to believe this is a real thing that happened, was a formalized agreement, signed by both Daniel and Constance, that had been drawn up under the auspices of the Hargrove family lawyer at the time, stating their intent to formalize their relationship in marriage within a period of 5 years. Now, this is not a legal marriage. This is not even close to a legal marriage under any interpretation of modern Illinois family law. A betrothal agreement has no standing in American courts. You cannot be married to someone because you signed a piece of paper saying you intended to get married someday. But Philip's lawyers were not actually arguing that Daniel was legally married to Constance. They were doing something more sophisticated. They were arguing that the document constituted evidence of a contractual partnership that had never been formally dissolved, and that under the terms of the original Hargrove family trust, which contained unusual, archaic language about recognized family partners and the conditions under which trust beneficiaries could assign their shares, Daniel's failure to dissolve this agreement before marrying me meant that his assignment of trust funds to me was potentially challengeable. In other words, they weren't saying I wasn't his wife. They were saying our marriage might not meet the definition of a recognized family partnership under the specific terms of the trust document that governed the $18 million. It was, in every sense of the word, a setup. A legal trap that had probably been designed years in advance, kept in reserve, to be deployed precisely in this kind of moment. And the woman they had deployed it through? Constance Whitfield had already signed a new affidavit, prepared by Philip's legal team, stating that she had always understood her arrangement with Daniel to constitute a recognized partnership and had never received formal notice of its dissolution. Constance, for her part, had reportedly received a very generous payment for her cooperation. Not officially, of course. Officially, it was a consulting fee to one of her business entities. This is what old money does when it feels threatened. It doesn't rage. It doesn't make scenes. It engineers. Quietly, carefully, with a team of people who have been paid well enough to not have a conscience about it. Philip placed his hands flat on the table. "We're not trying to be adversarial," he said, which is the exact sentence people say when they are trying to be adversarial. "We just want to make sure that Daniel's wishes, his true wishes, as expressed by the terms of the trust, are honored correctly. And we believe that a thorough review of the documentation is in everyone's best interest. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I reached into my bag and I put the envelope on the table. "Howard," I said, "I think it's time." Howard took the envelope. He looked at it. He nodded slightly, the way you nod when something you've been expecting finally arrives. He opened it. Inside were 3 things. The first was a document. A formal, notarized legal letter, dated 8 months ago, signed by Daniel and countersigned by Howard himself, formally and unambiguously dissolving, to whatever legal extent was possible, any and all prior agreements, betrothal contracts, partnership arrangements, or commitments to any party other than Maya Ellison Carter. The language was thorough. Howard had clearly drafted it to anticipate exactly the argument Philip's team was now making. It referenced the specific document, the betrothal agreement, by date and title. It stated clearly that Daniel had signed that original document under duress and without independent legal counsel, and that he considered it void and had considered it void for over a decade. Philip's lawyer started to speak. Howard held up one finger. Just one finger. And the lawyer stopped. The second item was a certified copy of our marriage certificate, authenticated by the Cook County Clerk's office, with an attached legal opinion from a separate attorney, not Howard, a second independent counsel, confirming the validity of the marriage under Illinois law and the absence of any legal impediment. Howard placed it on the table facing Philip. Philip's jaw was very tight. And then Howard reached for the third item. It was a USB drive. Daniel recorded a video message, Howard said. He asked that it be played in the event that his wishes were contested. He was very specific about the circumstances. I believe those circumstances are now before us. He plugged the drive into the conference room's display system. The screen at the end of the table lit up. And there was Daniel. He looked thin. He had lost weight by the time they filmed it. This was about a month before he died, Howard told me later, filmed right here in this conference room. He was wearing a blue button-down shirt. His hair had started growing back unevenly from where the radiation had hit it. His hands were folded on the table in front of him, very still, the way hands get when a person is conserving energy. But his eyes were clear, sharp, present. The most present I had seen him in months, honestly. Like he had been saving up whatever remained of his focus for exactly this. He looked directly into the camera. He said, "If you're watching this, then my family has done what I knew they would do. Philip, Diana, whatever lawyers you've hired this time." He paused. "I want to be clear about something. Everything I have, everything in the Hargrove Trust that came to me, everything I've saved over 15 years of working and living quietly and building a real life, belongs to my wife, Maya Ellison Carter. She is my wife. She is the only person I have ever freely chosen. She is the person who showed up for me every single day of this illness without being asked, without being compensated, without a team of lawyers advising her on her best interests. She just loved me. That's it. She just loved me." He stopped for a moment, collected himself. "I know the games you play," he said, and now he was looking directly at the camera with an expression that I had never seen on him in life, something cold and absolutely clear. "I know about the Constance arrangement. I know you've probably activated it by now. Which is why Howard has documentation I prepared with him, that makes the status of that so-called agreement crystal clear. I signed that document when I was 23 years old at my father's direction, without independent counsel, under explicit pressure to do so or lose my place in the family. I am on record stating that. Under oath. In a deposition taken 4 months ago. Howard has that deposition." I saw Philip's lawyer whisper something. Philip did not respond. His face had gone completely flat. I also want to address something else, Daniel continued. The trust language about recognized family partnerships. I know Philip has been exploring that angle. Because I know Philip. He's thorough, I'll give him that. What he may not have accounted for is that 6 months ago, I had Howard file a formal amendment request with the trust administrator, an independent fiduciary at First Midwest Trust, clarifying the definition of recognized family partner in the context of my specific share. That amendment was accepted and processed. It names Maya by name. It was filed before my diagnosis was publicly known and before any legal challenge was initiated. He paused again. I thought of everything, he said. And for just a second, he almost smiled. That crooked, real smile. Or I tried to. I've had a lot of time to think. Then something shifted in his face. The formal, prepared tone dropped slightly. He looked into the camera differently. Maya, he said, if you're in that room right now and you're hearing this, I'm so sorry you had to be there for this. I'm sorry you have to deal with any of this on top of everything else. You didn't sign up for a Hargrove. You signed up for a guy from the laundromat who didn't know how to do his own laundry. And I really hope, that the life we built together was enough of the real thing that this other stuff doesn't take up too much space in how you remember us. He looked straight into the lens. I love you. Take care of biscuit and marmalade. And take the money. Please. Take it and build something beautiful with it. That's what it's for. That's what it was always for. The screen went dark. The conference room was silent for what felt like a very long time after the video ended. I was crying. I hadn't planned on it. I had tried to prepare myself to be composed and professional and strategic. But hearing his voice, seeing his face, seeing him fight for me from beyond his own death, I couldn't hold it back. I wiped my face with the back of my hand and I looked up. Philip was staring at the blank screen. His expression was something I don't have a clean word for. Not defeat, exactly. More like a man who has just discovered that the hand he was so confident in is not the hand he thought he had. Diana was not looking at the screen. She was looking at the table. The teenage girl in the corner had put her phone completely down. She was looking at me. And her expression, and this was the thing that got me in a way I didn't expect, her expression was not hostile. It was just sad. And tired. Like she was sad and tired and had been both for a while. Philip's lead lawyer cleared his throat. We'll need to review the deposition and the trust amendment filing before. Of course, Howard said, and his voice had a pleasant evenness to it that somehow communicated quite clearly that the review was going to go one way, and we all knew it. He gathered the documents on his side of the table with deliberate calm. I'll have my office send over the complete file by end of day. I'll also note for the record that any legal challenge to the will or the trust disposition will be contested vigorously, and that we have substantial documentation to support Mrs. Carter's claim. I would strongly advise your clients to carefully consider their next steps. Philip stood. He picked up his jacket from the back of his chair. He looked at me once more, directly, for just a moment, and I couldn't tell exactly what was in it. Something complex. Something that might have been buried deep under everything else. Something almost like grief. For a brother he had lost in multiple ways. He didn't say anything to me. He walked out. Diana followed without a word. The lawyers followed. The teenage girl, Philip's younger daughter, I learned later, named Eloise, who was 17 and had been at the office that day for reasons nobody seemed to fully have planned for, she paused at the door. She looked at me. He talked about you, she said quietly. My uncle. When I was little, before everything got really bad between him and my dad. He used to come to our house sometimes for the holidays, and he would always say, I remember because it seemed strange to me when I was a kid, he would say, I'm going to have a real life someday. A real one. Just you wait. She looked at me for another second. I think he did, she said. And then she left. I want to be honest with you about something. The video, the documents, the deposition, all of it was extraordinarily powerful evidence. It was thorough. Daniel had been careful and deliberate and, as he said, he had tried to think of everything. But that did not mean Philip's team went quietly. They filed a formal contest to the will. They challenged the trust amendment on procedural grounds. They hired a forensic document expert to question the notarization on one of Howard's filings, an argument that went nowhere but cost time and money and emotional energy to fight. The whole process took 8 months. 8 months of legal filings and counterfilings. 8 months of phone calls with Howard, of depositions, of sitting in conference rooms and waiting rooms and offices while lawyers argued about definitions and dates and the meaning of archaic language in a trust document that had been written before I was born. 8 months during which I was also grieving. During which I would sometimes sit in the Oak Park house with Biscuit in my lap and just cry for no specific reason except that my husband was gone and the world felt wrong without him in it. 8 months during which Constance Whitfield's lawyer sent a separate letter implying she might pursue her own claim, a letter that Howard described as aggressively theoretical. And which ultimately went nowhere because even Constance's own attorney apparently wasn't confident enough in the argument to actually file it. And through all of it, through every motion and every hearing and every carefully worded letter, Daniel's preparation held. The deposition, the trust amendment, the dissolution document, the notarized marriage certificate, and most powerfully, I think, the video, which was entered into the record and which, in the words of the mediator who eventually helped resolve the matter, speaks with unusual clarity to Mr. Hargrove's intent and state of mind. The contest was ultimately withdrawn. The Hargrove family lawyers sent a 1-page letter to Howard's office on a Friday afternoon in October stating that their clients had elected to withdraw their challenge and wished the surviving spouse well in her administration of the estate. No apology, but no further fight. Howard called me right away. "It's done," he said. I sat down on my kitchen floor when he said it. Right there on the tile floor with my back against the cabinets. And I cried for a long time. The kind of crying that is partly grief and partly relief and partly something that doesn't have a clean name, a releasing of something you've been holding so tight for so long that when it finally goes, you don't know what to do with your hands. Marmalade came and sat on my foot, which is her version of a hug. The trust distribution was completed 6 weeks later. $18,412,000. In an account in my name. People always want to know this part. I understand. It's human. We're all curious about what someone does when they suddenly have more money than they ever imagined. And honestly, the first few months I did almost nothing with it. I paid off the house. That felt important, to have that place, our place, be fully ours in a way it hadn't been. I kept the patio project we'd always talked about and finally did it, had a contractor come in and build the thing properly, with good stone pavers and string lights and a decent outdoor table. I'd sit out there on warm evenings with a glass of wine and try to feel Daniel there with me. Sometimes I could, a little. I kept working. This surprised some people. Why would you keep working when you don't have to? But here's the thing, my work is mine. My design work, my clients, the projects I'm proud of. That has nothing to do with the money. I scaled back slightly, took fewer clients, took on only work I genuinely wanted to do. But I kept working because it keeps me anchored to something real. I set up a foundation. The Daniel Carter Foundation, his chosen name, not the Hargrove name. The foundation funds college scholarships for first-generation college students in the Chicago area. It's small right now, but it's real. The first class of scholars was 4 students. One of them is studying architecture. One of them wants to be a nurse. One of them is undecided but spectacular. And one of them reminded me so much of a young version of Daniel when she came in for her interview. This quiet, hungry intelligence barely contained in a 20-year-old body that I had to look away for a second to collect myself, confident enough in the argument to actually file it. And through all of it, through every motion and every hearing and every carefully worded letter, Daniel's preparation held. The deposition, the trust amendment, the dissolution document, the notarized marriage certificate, and most powerfully, I think, the video, which was entered into the record and which, in the words of the mediator who eventually helped resolve the matter, speaks with unusual clarity to Mr. Hargroves. I gave a significant sum to the food pantry in Pilsen where Daniel volunteered, the one he never talked about. They were able to expand their hours and hire 2 full-time staff members. I went there once, unannounced, and watched people come in and leave with groceries for their families. And I thought about Daniel showing up there every second Saturday without telling anyone, without making it a thing, just showing up. I put the rest in a diversified portfolio, and I try not to look at it too much. Because here is the truth about money, a truth I've come to very slowly and very honestly. The money changed my circumstances. It removed a specific category of fear from my life, the fear of not being okay financially, the fear of one bad month spiraling into something worse. That is real. I do not minimize it. That kind of security is something I know many people do not have and that I do not take for granted. But the money did not bring Daniel back. The money did not make the house not feel too quiet on Sunday mornings. The money did not fill the space on the other side of the bed. The money is not the story. Daniel is the story. Daniel walking into a laundromat and not knowing how to do his own laundry. Daniel choosing every single day a small real life over a large hollow one. Daniel spending his last months of clarity building a legal fortress to protect me because he couldn't be there to protect me himself. That's the story. The twist, what I found out 2 months after it was all over. I said there was a twist. I promised you one. Here it is. About 2 months after the legal challenge was resolved, maybe December, it was getting cold again, winter coming back around, I got a letter. Not from a lawyer. From Eloise, Philip's younger daughter. The one who'd been in the conference room. The one who'd told me Daniel said he was going to have a real life someday. The letter was handwritten, which already made it feel different from everything else I'd received in the past year. 3 pages, neat handwriting, blue ink. She wrote, "Dear Maya, I'm not sure if I should be sending this, but I've written it 4 times, and I keep deciding I should. I want you to know some things about what happened that you may not know." She told me that she had argued with her father about the legal challenge. That she had told him, at 17 years old, that it was wrong. That what they were doing to Daniel's wife, to me, was wrong. That Daniel had clearly made his choices freely, and those choices deserved to be respected. Philip had not listened. But Eloise had done something else. She wrote that in the months before Daniel died, months during which she knew, because she had overheard her parents. Biscuit had just started going outside again after a long indoor winter. I was going through some of Daniel's things. Not for the first time. But this particular evening I was going through a box of his that I hadn't opened yet. Notebooks. Old papers. A couple of paperback books with his handwriting in the margins. At the bottom of the box, in a plain manila envelope, was a single printed photograph. It was a picture of Daniel. He looked young in it, maybe 20, 21. He was standing outside somewhere. A park, it looked like. And he was with someone. A woman. Young, dark-haired, laughing at something off camera. And Daniel was looking at her the way you look at someone you love when you think no one's watching. That unguarded look. There was a sticky note on the back of the photo in Daniel's handwriting. Just a few words. It said, before I knew what real was. I'm sorry, C. You deserved better from a better family too. C. Constance. I sat with that photograph for a long time. And what I felt was complicated and human and real. There was a twinge of something. Not quite jealousy. More like the specific ache of knowing that someone you love had a whole interior life you'll never fully know. A whole history of hurt and regret and faces you never got to see. But there was something else underneath it. Compassion. For a young woman who had been, in her own way, a pawn in the same family game Daniel had escaped. Who had been pointed at a person, told this is who you will be with, and had probably built real feelings around that before it all fell apart. Who had later, yes, signed that affidavit, and I won't pretend that doesn't complicate things, but who had lived most of her life inside a system that was not her fault. I don't know if Constance is a good person. I don't know what she is. But I know that the girl in that photograph, the one laughing at something off camera, had nothing to do with the legal dispute. She was just a girl. I put the photo back in the envelope. I kept it, because it's part of Daniel. All the parts of him. Even the ones that hurt a little. I've told you the story because I needed to tell it. Not for the money. Not to be dramatic. Not to go viral or get brand deals or any of that. I genuinely needed to put it into words because it's been living in my chest for over a year now, taking up space, and sometimes things need to be spoken to become what they actually are. What actually are they? Here's what I believe after everything. Daniel Carter was a human being who made mistakes, who carried secrets, who was imperfect and complicated and sometimes too afraid to fully trust, even the person he loved most. I know that now. I hold that truth alongside the other truths, that he was kind, that he was real, that he chose me freely and fought for me in the only way he had left. Both things are true. People contain both things. That's what makes loving someone real. When you love the whole person, complexity and secrets and crooked smiles and all. I did not get a long marriage. I did not get the patio renovation with him. I did not get the trip to Portugal we'd been talking about for 3 years and never booked. I did not get enough Sunday mornings. But I got real. And real, as it turns out, is the most valuable thing there is. If you're watching this and you're in something that doesn't feel real, a relationship, a life, a version of yourself, I want you to hear what Daniel told Eloise. A real life exists. And it is worth every single thing it costs you to find it. That's all I've got. Thank you for being here. If this story moved you, if any part of it landed, please share it. Not for me, but because maybe someone in your life needs to hear that a real life is possible. That it's worth fighting for. That even the people who love you most are complicated, and that's okay. Drop a comment. Tell me what part hit you hardest. Tell me where you're watching from. Tell me what your real life looks like. And if you haven't already, subscribe. I'll keep showing up here, telling the stories that matter. The real ones. I'll see you next time. Okay, so the first date. I have to tell you about the first date because it is a perfect encapsulation of everything Daniel Carter was and everything that made me fall completely in love with him over the course of about 4 hours on a Wednesday night in Wicker Park. He picked a restaurant. A Thai place on Milwaukee Avenue that had been there since the 90s. The kind of spot with mismatched chairs and framed photos of the King of Thailand on the wall and a laminated menu that hadn't been updated since 2009, but everything on it was incredible. Not a trendy spot. Not the kind of place a guy takes you to impress you with a reservation he made 3 weeks in advance. Just a really good, comfortable, honest place. I noticed that. I filed it away. We ordered too much food. That was his suggestion. Let's just get a bunch of things and share. I liked that immediately. Sharing food on a first date is a level of comfort most people don't suggest until the third or fourth. He wasn't performing. He asked me genuinely about my design work. What do you actually design? What's the project you're most proud of? What's something you design that nobody would ever know you made, but that you walk past and feel good about? That last question. I remember stopping mid-bite because nobody had ever asked me that before. Not like that. I told him about a mural I'd done the design work for, a community mural on the side of a rec center in Logan Square. I hadn't painted it myself, a muralist had, but I'd done all the concept work and the color palette and the layout. Big, bright, chaotic in the best way. Flowers and birds and faces of neighborhood kids and a giant sun in the corner. I passed it sometimes on the way to the train and felt, every single time, a specific quiet satisfaction that I never talked about because it seemed like a weird thing to be proud of. He got it immediately. Completely. He said, that's the best kind of pride. The kind that doesn't need an audience. Then he told me something about himself. He told me, and this was the most personal thing he'd offered yet, that he had this habit, every time he moved to a new neighborhood, of walking every single block within a 1-mile radius of his apartment. Just walking. Memorizing it. Knowing where the good coffee shop was, and where the weird little hardware store was, and which corner had the guy who sold flowers out of a bucket every Saturday. I need to know where I live, he said. Really know it. I spend a lot of time in places I didn't know. I don't want to do that anymore. I asked what he meant by that. Spend a lot of time in places he didn't know. He smiled in a way that was slightly sad and said, a story for another time. A story for another time. I accepted that. He wasn't deflecting, he was genuinely earmarking it. Like he was already planning on a next time. After dinner we walked. Just walked. All the way down Milwaukee toward Logan Square, talking the whole time. At one point we stopped at a corner because a street musician was playing, a guy with a guitar and one of those little battery-powered amps, playing a Wilco song I happened to know, and we just stood there for 3 songs without saying anything. And I thought, this is it. This is the one. Not in a grand, sweeping, cinematic way. In a very quiet, very certain, barely above a whisper way. We didn't kiss that night. He walked me home. I lived 3 blocks from the Thai restaurant, and we stood outside my building for a minute. This was really nice, he said. Yeah, I said. It was. Can I text you when I get home? You definitely should. He texted me 13 minutes later. He said, I walked the whole way home instead of taking the train. Needed to think. I think I might be in a little trouble here. I read that message sitting on my couch with a huge smile on my face. I texted back, same. I mentioned Millennium Park. The October evening. The shaking voice. The ring. But I didn't tell you the full version, and the full version is better. We had been having a fight that day. A real one. Not a screaming match. We were not screamers, either of us, but a real, tense, emotionally loaded disagreement about something that felt significant at the time and that I genuinely cannot fully remember now. Which tells you something about the relative importance of most things we think are important. I think it was about communication. About me feeling like he wasn't telling me enough, wasn't sharing enough of himself. The irony of this, knowing what I know now, is almost too much. We had gone quiet on each other for most of the afternoon. The kind of quiet that has a weight to it. He had gone for a walk. I had stayed home and done some work and told myself I was fine and was not fine. Around 4 o'clock he texted, come outside. Put on your coat. I almost said no. I was still in my feelings. But something made me go. He was standing on the sidewalk in front of our building. At that point, we were living together in the Lincoln Square apartment, with 2 cups of coffee from the place around the corner. He handed me one. He didn't apologize out loud. He just looked at me with this expression that said, "I'm sorry and I see you, and I know I'm not always easy." We walked to the train in silence. Got on the Brown Line. He didn't tell me where we were going. We got off at Millennium. The park was pretty empty for a weekday evening. Getting dark. Getting cold. The beam caught the last of the light and turned everything around it into gold. We walked through the park without talking very much. The coffee was good. The cold felt clean. And then he stopped. Right in front of the Crown Fountain, those big video towers with the faces, the ones that spit water in the summer, standing quiet and dark now in the October evening. He stopped and turned to me, and his hands were shaking. Not because of the cold. He said, "I know I'm not always easy to love. I know I hold things too close sometimes, and I don't always show you enough of what's inside. And I know you deserve more of that. I know you do. I'm working on it. I swear to you I'm working on it." His voice was tight. "But I also know that you are the best thing in my life. And that when I am with you, I feel like the person I always meant to be. And I want to keep feeling that for as long as I'm alive." He reached into his coat pocket. The ring was simple. Just a round diamond on a thin gold band. Nothing showy. Not the kind of ring that announces itself from across the room. The kind of ring that says, "I thought about who you are." "Maya," he said, "will you please keep putting up with me?" I laughed. I cried. I said yes before the sentence was finished. He put the ring on my finger with his shaking hands, and it fit perfectly. I still don't know how he got the size right. I never asked him, and then he just held my hand for a long time. Standing in front of the silent fountain in the cold, dark Millennium Park with the city glowing all around us. A person choosing a real life. Right there in the middle of Chicago on a Tuesday evening in October. I want to go back to the parking garage. Because I told you about it briefly, but I don't think I gave you enough of it, and it matters. The parking garage at Northwestern Memorial. Level P3, which has a slightly greenish fluorescent light that makes everybody look slightly wrong. We were in the Honda. He still had it. He'd never gotten rid of it, and I had been holding Daniel's hand since we got the news, and I hadn't let go yet. 45 minutes. Sitting there. The doctor had been careful and compassionate and thorough. He had explained what glioblastoma is and what it does, and what the treatment options were, and what the realistic range of outcomes looked like. He had answered our questions, and I had a lot of questions because when I don't know something, my instinct is to gather information immediately and aggressively. Daniel sat quietly through most of it. On the way to the car, we didn't speak. I think we were each processing at whatever speed we processed at. And then we were in the car. And the car didn't move. And I was still holding his hand. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly. A car passed in the lane behind us. Daniel was looking straight ahead. His profile. I know that profile so well. I have it memorized. The way you memorize things you love without meaning to. The slight indentation in his chin. The way his jaw worked when he was thinking hard. He said, very quietly, "I need you to know something." "Okay," I said. "I have had a genuinely good life," he said. "Most of it. Not the early part. But from the point where I decided to be the person I wanted to be instead of the one I was supposed to be, that part has been good. Really genuinely good. And you are the biggest reason for that." I couldn't speak. "I'm telling you that now," he said, "because I want you to know it when everything is, before things get. I want you to have heard it when I could say it clearly." I put my forehead against his shoulder. He rested his cheek on top of my head. We sat like that until the parking garage attendant knocked on our window to tell us that the level was closing in 20 minutes and we should think about heading out. Even in the middle of the worst thing that had ever happened to us, Chicago just kept going. The parking garage still closed. The city still moved. The fluorescent lights still buzzed. We drove home. He made pasta. I don't know why, but he made pasta. Like it was something to do with his hands. We ate it and watched something forgettable on Netflix, and I did not let go of him for the entire evening. Daniel described the house to me once. It was a night in late summer, about 2 months before he died, when he was having a good evening, enough energy to sit on the patio, warm enough to be outside without a jacket. I had made iced tea. Biscuit was attacking a bug near the garden. He started talking about it unprompted. Like something in the evening light had unlocked a door. The Hargrove house in Lake Forest was, he said, enormous in the specific way that makes you feel small on purpose. That's how he described it. It was designed to make you feel small. The ceilings were high because high ceilings communicate power. The foyer had marble because marble communicates permanence. The portrait of my grandfather in the dining room was hung at a specific height so that he appeared to be looking slightly down at everyone at the table. I asked if he was serious about the portrait. Dead serious, he said. It was calculated. Everything in that house was calculated to communicate a message about the family that lived there. Nothing was accidental. His bedroom had been on the 3rd floor. The view was of the backyard, which was manicured within an inch of its life. The gardeners came twice a week. Daniel used to watch them from his window sometimes, wondering what it was like to do a job like that, visible, physical, real. Something you could point to at the end of the day and say, I did that. His father's study was on the 1st floor, behind a door that was always closed. Daniel and Philip had been called into that room periodically throughout their childhoods. Never for good reasons. The only good thing about growing up in that house, Daniel told me, swirling his iced tea, was the library. The family had a real library. Shelves on every wall, floor to ceiling. Old books, a lot of them, the kind with faded spines. Daniel used to disappear in there on weekends. He'd pull books at random, novels, histories, biographies, sometimes things he didn't understand, but kept reading anyway because the act of reading felt like the only real privacy available to him. That's probably why I fell in love with a designer, he said, looking at me. Someone who makes beautiful things for people to actually live in and use. Everything in that house was for display. You make things that are for people. I reached over and took his hand on the table. You made a beautiful life, I told him. He smiled. We did, he said. The night before I walked into Howard's office. Daniel had been gone 10 days. The house was still full of flowers from people who had sent them. They lined the kitchen counter and the dining room table, and a few had migrated to the living room windowsills. The whole house smelled of lilies and roses and something green underneath. Some of them were starting to turn, and I couldn't bring myself to throw them out. I couldn't sleep. I got up around 2 in the morning and made tea. Sat at the kitchen table in the dark with just the light above the stove on, the way you sit at 2 in the morning when you need to be awake, but don't want to be fully present to it. Howard had called me that afternoon to prepare me. He had told me the Hargroves would be there. He had given me a sense of what to expect. He had been calm and thorough and kind. He had said, "You are fully protected. Daniel did everything right. You are going to be okay." But 2 in the morning is not a time for logic and legal reassurances. 2 in the morning is a time for fear. I was afraid. Not of Philip and his lawyers exactly. More a general, formless fear that the world had become a different shape than I understood. That the life I thought I knew had had a false bottom, and what was underneath was something I'd been dropped into without a map. I talked to Daniel. Out loud, alone at the kitchen table. I said, "Okay. I need you to have actually thought of everything." I said, "I need you to have actually thought of everything because I cannot do this alone, and I don't know how to do this, and I am so tired, and I miss you so much it feels like something is physically broken inside me." I said, "Please." Marmalade jumped up on the table, which she is not supposed to do, but which I have given up enforcing since Daniel died, and looked at me with her enormous yellow eyes. Cats are strange creatures. They are not comforting in the way dogs are comforting, which is obvious and physical and uncomplicated. Cats comfort you in a sidelong, mysterious way that doesn't make complete sense, but works anyway. She looked at me for a moment. Then she sat down on the table approximately 8 inches from me and turned slightly away, like she was just choosing to exist near me, and sometimes that is enough. I sat there until 4. And then I went back to sleep for 2 hours. And then I put on the black dress and went downtown. I've thought about Philip a lot since everything happened. Not out of any desire for closure or reconciliation. More out of a genuine human curiosity about how people become who they become. Daniel had described him with a kind of tired, clear-eyed sadness. He didn't hate Philip. I want to make that clear. There was no venom in the way Daniel talked about his brother. More of a sorrow. Like looking at someone who went down a different fork in the same road and didn't end up anywhere good. Philip didn't have the same option I had, Daniel once told me. He was the oldest son. The heir. My father had been working on him since he was born. By the time I was old enough to understand what was happening and to start planning my exit, Philip had been in it so long that the exit wasn't visible to him anymore. He'd become the thing my father made him. I don't think he even knows that there was another option. This is Daniel. Extending empathy to a man who was, even as they spoke, probably already laying the groundwork for the legal challenge that would follow his death. Because that's who Daniel was. Complicated and generous at the same time. I think about what Philip must have felt, growing up. The older brother who stayed. Who did everything right. Who took the family business on his back and carried it and made it bigger. Who probably, somewhere along the way, started believing that the family's way was the only way, that money and power and control were the actual substance of life, not the decoration around it. I think about the moment Daniel left. What that must have meant to Philip. Not just the insult of it, the younger brother walking away from what the older brother had devoted his life to upholding. But the fear underneath the insult. Because if Daniel could leave and build something real, then the life Philip had chosen starts to look like a different thing. Like a choice. And choices can be wrong. I don't forgive Philip for what he tried to do to me. I want to be clear about that. What he orchestrated was deliberate and cruel and designed to strip a grieving woman of what her husband had specifically and carefully left her. That's not something I'm interested in minimizing or explaining away. But I understand it. In the way that you can understand something without endorsing it. He was protecting the only world he knew how to live in. The tragedy is that it was never a world worth protecting. I want to talk about grief for a minute. Because people have a certain idea of what grief looks like, and I want to give you the real version. Real grief is not continuous weeping. It's not a steady, legible sadness that you can point to and say, this is what grief looks like. It's not cinematic. Real grief is a Tuesday afternoon when you go to write something on the calendar and you pick up the pen and then put it back down and then stand in the kitchen for 11 minutes, not knowing what you were going to do next. It's reaching for your phone to text him something funny you just saw. You do it before you remember, and then the memory landing like a physical thing. It's the smell of a shampoo that's still in the shower and the specific torture of deciding when to throw it away. It's getting really good news, genuinely good news, something that would have delighted him, and having nobody to call who would understand exactly why it's good. Other people can be happy for you. Nobody can be exactly as happy for you as the person who knew you that well. It's also, and this is the part nobody talks about enough, it's also sometimes laughing. Genuinely, freely laughing at something. And then the guilt of having laughed. And then the work of reminding yourself that laughing is not a betrayal. That being okay is not a betrayal. That he specifically, in fact, told you to go build something beautiful, which implies he wants you to have days that feel beautiful. Grief is not a destination. It's not something you go through and come out the other side of, clean and resolved. It's something you learn to carry differently over time. The weight doesn't change. You just get better at distributing it. There were days during the legal fight, the worst days, when another motion had been filed or another strategy deployed by Philip's team, when I felt something that surprised me. A kind of cold, focused anger. Not at Daniel, not exactly, but at the situation. At the fact that I was having to fight, actively, for a life that was supposed to have already been secured. At the fact that my grief had to share space with strategy and documentation and legal language. And I want to tell you what I did with that anger. I let Howard have it. Not literally. I didn't yell at Howard. But every time I sat down in that conference room or on a call with him, I channeled that cold, focused anger into clarity, into precision, into being the most prepared, most organized, most unshakable version of myself that I could be. Daniel had done his part. I was going to do mine. That's love, too. Not just the soft parts. The fighting parts, too. The Daniel Carter Foundation officially became a 501c3 nonprofit in March, about 14 months after he died. The process of setting it up had been its own thing, lawyers again, a different kind this time, nonprofit specialists, plus an accountant and a board of directors I had to recruit. I asked 3 people I trusted completely, my college roommate Priya, who works in education policy in D.C. and has more brains than anyone I've ever met, a man named Marcus, who had been Daniel's closest friend from his early Chicago years. The one person outside of me who had known him fully and loved him anyway, and a woman named Dr. Sandrachin who runs a college access nonprofit on the South Side and agreed to join our board with what I can only describe as the energy of someone who has been waiting for exactly this kind of resource to become available. Our focus: first-generation college students in the Chicago metro area. No income cap, though priority goes to students who face the most significant financial barriers. No GPA minimum beyond basic admission requirements, because I am not interested in just funding the students who are already succeeding. I want to fund the ones who have the potential and not the runway. The application asks one question in the essay section. Describe something you've worked hard at outside of school. What did it teach you? We got 87 applications in our first year. Reading them took me a week. I read every single one. Some of them I read twice. There was a kid from Englewood who had taught himself to fix motorcycles in his uncle's garage and wrote about what it felt like when an engine that had been dead started running again. There was a girl from the northern suburbs who had been the primary caregiver for her grandmother for 3 years while her parents worked doubles and who wrote about learning patience the hard way. There was a boy from Pilsen near the food pantry, actually, which made me catch my breath a little, who had spent 2 years trying to get his little sister's IEP modified at their school and had researched special education law extensively and written about how the system fails families and what he planned to do about it. We funded 16 students in year 1. I wrote each of them a personal letter. Not a form letter. An actual letter specific to their application, specific to what I had seen in them. One of the students, Destiny, who is studying nursing at DePaul, wrote back. She wrote, "Thank you for seeing me. I have been trying to be seen for so long." I taped that letter to the wall of the small home office I converted from our spare bedroom. Underneath it, I put the yellow tulip that Daniel would have brought me from the farmer's market for no reason except that he remembered. A pressed one. Dried and flattened inside a book and then framed. Grandmother's favorite flower. Still there. It's been more than a year now since Daniel died. I live in Oak Park still. The house. Our house. People ask if I'm going to sell it and move somewhere new, start fresh, as they say, like the place itself holds the grief. But I don't experience it that way. The house is full of him, yes. And I want it to be full of him. Every creak in the hallway floor. The cabinet in the kitchen that sticks. The patio we finally fixed. I am not the same person I was before I met Daniel. I am not even the same person I was before he died. Grief changes you. Truth changes you. Knowing that the man you loved had an entire hidden world and chose your world anyway over it, that changes you too. I think about those 5 years differently now. Not worse. Not darker. But with more dimension. Like a painting you've looked at 100 times and then someone tells you there's a second painting underneath, a sketch, an earlier version, and now when you look at it you see both. The life Daniel showed me was true. The laundromat, the farmer's market, the Trader Joe's, the cramped apartment, the Sunday cooking, the 2 cats, the cracked dashboard. All of it was true. He chose it deliberately and specifically, and with full knowledge of what he was leaving behind. He chose it every single day. But the other painting was there too. The Lake Forest mansion. The family portrait. The trust document. The brother who stayed. And what I've arrived at slowly, imperfectly, still arriving, is this. He gave me the life he wanted. Not the life he came from. The life he wanted. And in the end, he found a way to protect it. That's a love story. Messy and human and complicated and real. The best kind. I still talk to him sometimes. Not constantly, I'm not going to romanticize it into something it isn't. But sometimes, when something happens that he would have found funny, I say it out loud to the room. And sometimes when I'm scared about something, I say that out loud too. I don't know if that's grief or faith or just habit. Maybe those 3 things are not that different from each other. If you are someone who grew up in a family that used you, controlled you, weaponized love as leverage, I see you. Daniel saw you too. From a Lake Forest mansion and a laundromat and an Oak Park patio and a conference room on the 32nd floor of a building in the Loop, I think he saw you. And he would say to you what he said to his niece. Get out when you can. Find yourself a real life. It exists. And it is worth every single thing it costs you.